All right. Hi, everybody. I think we're going to get started. I am Florence McGregor. I'm the Senior Program and Community Engagement Manager for NESEA, the Northeast Sustainable Energy Association. I'd like to welcome you all to today's virtual event, Lessons from Bottom Lines, Navigating the Current Landscape. NESEA's mission involves cultivating a community of practitioners to advance the adoption of sustainability in the built environment. And as many of you know, if you're familiar with NESEA, we usually meet that mission with in-person programming. But this afternoon, we are very happy to be able to bring you this content in remote form. I'd like to introduce two members of our board of directors, Kate Stephenson of Helm Construction Solutions and Rachel White of Big Meister Inc. Kate is a facilitator of our Bottom Lines program, and she's going to be sharing some case studies about how businesses that participate in the program are handling some of the unique challenges that they're facing right now and how they're preparing for solutions moving forward. Rachel is a participant in the program and is going to be moderating the Q&A at the end of the webinar. So speaking of Q&A, you'll notice that you all came on muted and with your cameras off. We have a bunch to get through and not a lot of time together. So to keep things moving, there is the Q&A bar that you should see somewhere, a little button. If you have a question anytime during the webinar, please send it in. During the presentation portion, Rachel will be monitoring the questions that are sent. So when we get to the Q&A at the end, she has a list ready to go. So please feel free to send them in. Kate will not be following as she goes because it's a bit distracting to do presenting slides and speaking and also reading those. So that's all from me. And Rachel and I are going to disappear for a few minutes while we turn the floor over to Kate. Thank you.
Well, welcome everyone. Happy to be Zooming to you from Montpelier, Vermont, and sharing a little bit about the Building Energy Bottom Lines program at NESEA and how the Bottom Lines network has really been able to learn and respond to this situation that we're in. So I thought I'd just start out and talk a little bit about, for those of you who are not familiar with Bottom Lines, just a little bit about the program and how it works. We started Bottom Lines in 2014 with about 30 companies who are all NESEA Business Members, and really as a way to help the companies that are part of NESEA improve their business practices. And not just focused solely around kind of like the nitty-gritty business building science kinds of stuff that we get when we go to NESEA conferences and pro tours, but also really getting into the business side of things. How can we make our businesses truly sustainable, but from a triple bottom line perspective, not just focusing only on profit. So when we talk about triple bottom line, we're just talking about both the people and the planet in addition to the profit. And how we can balance all of those things. And the Bottom Lines network is really a peer network. So we have gone from starting with about 30 companies and we've grown to about 60 member companies. They are spread all across the Northeast and into Canada. And they are divided up into 6 network groups. So they have about 10 companies in each group. And we get together twice a year, usually in person, face-to-face, and each time we come together, we go and actually visit one of the companies in the group. So one of the companies is always the host, and we go there and we get to meet their whole team and learn about their systems and really kind of do a deep dive into their business practices as a way to help them identify some challenges and potential strategies for things that they could do to address those challenges. So it's been a great learning experience for me. I was a participant in Bottom Lines for the first couple of years and then came on as a facilitator of one of the groups. And I think, when NESEA asked me to present today on this topic, first of all, it's a bit of a challenge because I'm trying to, collect lessons learned from 60 companies. But on the other hand, I think that the last 2 months have really shown the value of this kind of peer network in so many ways, because we have been able to share information with each other and kind of provide support as folks are going through the process of layoffs and losing jobs and all kinds of different, the fallout from the current pandemic crisis. And so it has been a very active past 6 or 8 weeks within Bottom Lines. We both are trying to adjust to not being able to meet in person. My group was supposed to be meeting in person a couple weeks ago, and we had to adjust our plans, try and move some of that content into a digital format. But we also do have a listserv for the whole Bottom Lines network, and that has become a real hotspot in information sharing. We're also been doing office hours as a weekly thing with all the Bottom Lines members, just to check in with each other on Fridays and find out kind of what the issues are and what the different hot topics are that people are thinking about. So the goal of our time today is really to draw out from that last couple months of conversation some of the nuggets, some of the stories about what companies are working on and have been doing, both kind of looking backwards and as it's been changing on a day-to-day basis, but also looking forwards and how people are planning for the future. So I think I'll just dive into some examples, and there's some there kind of a couple big topics. If we're trying to divide into chunks, like what are the types of things that we've learned in the last few weeks? One major topic has been around financial planning. How do firms deal with, plan for furloughs, layoffs? What does that look like? PPP, federal stimulus, hot topics of conversation. So like thinking about financial planning. Another is around kind of working with your team, both how do you maintain cohesion within your crew when maybe they're stuck at home and not able to work, or if you are working remotely, how can you motivate and supervise your employees that are working remotely? So we'll talk about some examples of that. There's another whole aspect around communication and how do we communicate with each other, with clients, with the folks that we work with. And then I would say most recently there's been kind of, as people are starting to think about how do we get back to work eventually, there's thought about safety protocols, what does that look like, and sharing some resources around that. So those are kind of the big topics that I'll try and touch on and share some examples from. And then we'll get into questions when we get to the Q&A. So, on the first topic of financial planning, I don't have a slide for this one, but, one of the companies that I've been hearing from is New Frameworks, which is a design build company up in northern Vermont. They're also a worker cooperative. So they, when they first shut down their job sites, they have part of their team is in the design office and part of their team is out in the field on the construction crews. And they were really concerned about how to keep everyone going, during this time. So they actually created a 12-week plan to be able to continue to pay employees at a reduced rate, but to be able to kind of stretch out their financial resources to cover everyone on the team, whether they were able to work or not. And I think that's a theme that I've seen out of a couple of the different worker co-ops. South Mountain Company is another example, and where they are, really coming together to try and figure out a strategy that kind of either spreads the work out so that everyone has something to do, or is just trying to take care of everyone on the team. The other financial planning piece is a lot of lot of conversation in general around what are the strategies for the PPP. There's a lot of activity about sharing links of how to, what do you need? How do I fill out the forms? How do I get the information? And so I think our network has been really successful about helping everyone stay on top of a lot of that. That's changing very quickly. One of the other examples was really thinking about like, how do we keep our crews engaged if they are stuck at home and unable to work? This example is from Emerald Builders. They're up in Maine, and they decided to continue paying their employees at least for the first week of the shutdown, but launch something they're called Emerald University. So they set up a Zoom. They had folks call in 2 hours every morning, and they basically did building science tutorial. They had different folks on their team kind of offer to lead different sections, but like in this is just a screenshot that they posted on Instagram, but that looking at different details, kind of going into some of the building science of some of their projects, and they were able to try and just keep people connected even if they couldn't all continue with their regular work on the job site. They didn't continue, they haven't continued this, I think, for months, but they were able to organize it at least for the first week, until they did end up putting some folks on unemployment, but still doing check-in calls and things like that. And I think that's a theme that I've seen too, is even for folks who are furloughed, that they're just trying to do an occasional check-in to give updates from the company if they are shut down. And this was another fun example. This is Lewis Creek Company. They're up in the Burlington, Vermont area, and they also have they're design build. They have a large construction crew, close to 30 people, I think, altogether. And they decided to do a challenge to their whole employee group and said, we want you to, you are all creative and talented people, and while you're stuck at home and we're not able to work on our job sites, I'm sure you're going to be doing something creative. And so they had folks document their projects and send them in. They've been sharing some of them on social media and sharing them like with the whole team. And so it's just a way for, whether it's like, I baked this loaf of bread, or like I built a raised bed or a coffee table, they're kind of been able to keep some communication going while they're not working. So that was kind of fun. One of the other things that, before giving this presentation, I reached out to a bunch of the architects that are part of the Bottom Lines team, or Bottom Lines group, because I was kind of curious what, it's been pretty clear to me what some of the impacts are on construction companies. Some are shut down entirely, some are working a little bit, and some are able to keep most of their operations running. But I was curious, like, what happened on the architecture side of things. So I reached out to a few of those folks, and you'd think, you can do it all from home, but it sounds like it has been a real challenge to for the principals of the firm to be able to they're trying to figure out how to remotely supervise their team when you can't just walk over to their desk and look over their shoulder and see the plans that they're working on. So I think in those cases, what I heard was a lot of the principals are really getting more involved in kind of the day-to-day project management, just so that they can feel like they are on top of things. And the impact on the business side has been really across the board. I think for some of the folks that are in more residential design have seen a number of projects canceled or paused or postponed, and they're really seeing a reduction in work. Whereas some of the other firms that are doing more multifamily or commercial work, they have, these are long-term projects, large projects that have state or outside funding. They're able to continue pretty much as they were before in terms of workload. So One of the firms I talked to, they still have plenty of work, but they also realized that it wouldn't last forever. And so they kind of tried to reduce everyone's hours down to 30 hours a week to allow that work to kind of stretch out a little bit longer and keep everybody going, but just at a reduced schedule. So that's one of the strategies. And I've also heard about folks who have had a real drop in their billable work, be able to spend some extra time on projects that they might not have otherwise gotten to, and exploring some of those business development topics like just certification or the 2030 challenge, or trying to really dive into embodied carbon accounting. So there are definitely folks who are trying to take advantage of having a little bit of extra time potentially to dive into some of that stuff. One of the other big topics has been kind of around communication, and I think Rachel can potentially speak to this when we get to the Q&A a little bit. I think Big Meister has really taken a great lead on how to proactively communicate with clients, and so they did a great job of sharing, here's a letter that we just sent out to all of our current clients saying why we're shutting down ahead of some of the statewide shutdowns, and then proactively, like, here are plans for going forward. So that has been really interesting to see. Yes, have examples and kind of templates from one, see what one company is doing, be like, oh yeah, we really need to do something like that. Let me see if I can like cut and paste a little bit, take some of the ideas from other companies and use that as inspiration for how we plan our communication strategy. And I think that, it applies for clients, it applies for social media, it applies for how are we planning kind of our marketing and making sure that we're not tone deaf in the fact that just marketing and business as usual when there's a pandemic going on. The other interesting communications thing that I thought that Big Meister and a number of other bottom lines companies really took a lead on was a number of companies in Massachusetts came together to draft a letter to Governor Baker, kind of basically pushing back and asking that, saying that construction should not be considered essential work, and asking to reconsider that decision. And so that was an interesting thread through bottom lines of communication. This is an issue that's really has been very different from state to state about which states are shutting down and which states consider construction essential, and it's changing on a week-to-week basis. But interesting to see, bottom lines becoming a place where those conversations were starting to happen and then shared with the larger community. And then, the last topic that I kind of go into was really, as everyone is starting to think ahead and thinking about what does it mean to get back on a job site if they have been shut down, what does that look like? We've started to share some protocols, safety ideas. There was a whole interesting thread about what do hand washing stations look like? So this was one from Valley Home Improvement. Oh, there's another one from Warren Construction Group. So folks have been spending their time at home when they're not out working, like trying to figure out how to rig up some interesting setups and sharing those with each other and plans. And then other folks are writing protocols and sharing those, both kind of internal documents that are more for their own team, but also documents that can be shared with their clients and subcontractors and things that let people know, yes, we have a plan, we're addressing safety, this is what we're planning to do about it. I think, oh yeah, and this was just another one example. That also Emerald Builders, but especially kind of towards the beginning of this pandemic, there was a big push for contractors to go through their storage lockers and find some PPE that could potentially be donated to local hospitals and healthcare workers. So I know quite a few of the bottom lines companies were able to make donations of masks and other supplies. So that's kind of my quick rundown of some of the themes, the ideas that have come out of this. So I think at this point, I will open it up for questions if anything has come through, Rachel.
Thanks so much, Kate. I'm just checking the, no open questions yet. So I'll start one off, or just one comment and then one question. So one of the things that's been super valuable to me, and you mentioned this in a number of different contexts or ways throughout your presentation, are the different examples and templates that people have provided of everything from the mock-up of the hand washing stations to protocols that people could pick and choose from and adapt for themselves. But you also mentioned something, I think it was in reference specifically to the letter the Massachusetts companies did about sort of the bigger picture conversations that are happening on Bottom Line Central, the listserv. I wonder if maybe you could speak a little bit more to that, because that has been really valuable, this sort of, ability to think about, opportunity to think about our collective future. So I don't know if that's sort of a vague question, but I have found that that sort of support really valuable. And I'm wondering what, you have heard and seen from others about that particular aspect of the Bottom Lines community.
Yeah, well, I think, I think there are a couple pieces to it in that, I think early on in this crisis, there was a lot of angst and the kind of this moral question about should we be working and should we not be working? What's the right thing to do? And the states were not necessarily providing guidance. And so, those calls that we had in mid-March when things were just sort of emerging were really valuable, I think, in the where we would we would have these calls and kind of go around the room and hear, okay, this is what we're thinking. This is what we're thinking. We're thinking we're going to try and wrap this up, but then be closed next week. And having that kind of dialogue to hear what your peers are doing, because otherwise it's so easy to be in your little bubble and not necessarily know how to respond.
Yeah.
So there's kind of that, but then part of what you're asking is the going forward. How do we plan for the future? There's been a big theme around this idea of what does this look like? What does the construction industry look like 6 months from now or 2 years from now? Are we going into 5 years of recession? Are there, on the other hand, are there upsides to some of this disruption that could benefit our member companies that they can take advantage of? I'm trying to think of how.
No, that's really good. We do have some questions coming in. So first question would just like to think through more about sort of the job site protocols. The hand washing station is great, but there's also going to be a lot that we need to do around sort of cleaning and sanitizing. And I heard, I can't remember when, it may have been yesterday, actually may have been from you, Kate, about people who are taking an extra, it's like an extra hour to clean and sanitize at the end of the day. So can you speak to that at all? Sort of the challenges of people who are continuing to work, right, or working during this time, and how the additional protocols and precautions they've put in place are affecting their productivity and what they're able to do on the job site?
Yeah, well, that's obviously a huge issue, both for folks who are still working now and who are thinking about getting back on jobs, and trying to plan for that. So, there are a couple pieces that I think we should all be thinking about. One is yeah, how do we have the, beyond just the hand washing stations or hand sanitizer or things like that, what are realistically the number of people that can be on a job site? Here in Vermont, the governor has said you can get back to work in construction, but no more than 2 people at a time. So that's sort of like this arbitrary number that's coming from the state. But, how do we, on a site that might have multiple trades, and each of those trades have multiple people plus our own crews, I think, one of the questions that I've been asking a lot is not only how do we train our own team, but we also kind of have this supervision and responsibility for a much larger team that includes the plasterers and the plumbers and the tile guy, and all of those folks need to be trained in these new protocols and be on board with the new protocols. Because if we don't feel confident, I could potentially feel confident in, my small team, but we have to feel confident that the whole group that's coming on that site is following all of these safety practices.
It's really complicated.
It's a lot of people potentially. It's not sharing tools and having ways to spray down, wipe down tools that are shared, like table saws or chop saws. So that's, one aspect. It's, well, now we want everyone to have masks, but we just donated all our masks to the hospital. We don't have any left. I've heard that from a couple of people.
Yeah.
Like, oh, yeah. Okay, now what do we do?
Right. Right.
It's how do we minimize trips to the lumberyard, so that, we're not having that additional interaction with other people at the Home Depot or wherever it is.
Right.
So getting things delivered, are there, how do you deal with the deliveries? How do you make sure that your porta potties are sanitized?
Yeah, it's really challenging. It's sort of on a related question. We are related to this. We have a couple of questions related to that. One has to do, this may be sort of a broader question. I'm curious about bottom line company actions in their local communities and relationship to sub-suppliers and more conventional builders in their service areas. So, I'm trying to think if I've heard, if just thinking back and as you prepared for this presentation, what have you heard from bottom line companies about what roles they're playing in their communities and how they're, because of course it relates to this question of buy-in, obviously on our own job sites, but also more broadly about sort of the positions and the leadership that we take in our communities more broadly.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think what I was thinking about initially was also related to this idea of like the larger community of subcontractors and vendors and people that we work with on a day-to-day basis. And one of the things that we were reflecting on was, well, within Bottom Lines, we've been privileged to have a lot of information sharing going on. How do we then act as the conduits of information to our larger circle of people? So I think there has been a lot of concern around like, well, if I'm shut down, I know my guys are going to get unemployment, or my team is going to probably be okay, but I know that the tile installer, is probably never going to figure out PPP, or they're not going to be eligible for these federal programs. And so my shutting down my site has these ripple effects on these other people that I care about. So, so then the question is, how can construction companies then help the larger circle of people by sharing the information, by, taking the lead in developing those safety protocols? I do think that that's one way to have a little bit of a ripple effect is
right.
If the plumber then says, okay, this is what's happening on a Big Meister site. Why
right.
are you guys doing this? Because they're the ones that that are often interacting with many different contractors.
Right.
So that's just an opportunity. I haven't heard about necessarily like political action that has come out of this other than your letter.
Yeah. Yeah. So sort of switching gears a little bit, question about, are groups planning to more aggressively market, zero energy, efficiency, carbon, health, indoor air quality? Even with a recession, it seems that these, along with lower embodied carbon, sustainable green practices, there's some opportunities there. So the question is, what sort of conversations are happening in the bottom lines groups around this potential opportunity?
Yeah. To be honest, I haven't heard a whole lot of folks like kind of getting to the place where they can start to think about marketing as much. I think a lot of the last 6 weeks has been somewhat reactionary, and I do think that the tenor of those conversations is starting to change, and people are starting to think ahead. Okay, what do I need to do to either ramp up my marketing efforts? I do think there is an opportunity around this increased interest in indoor air quality. How exactly we're able to leverage that into selling net zero and passive house and things like that, I'm not totally sure yet. I haven't seen a lot of conversation about that on bottom lines yet, but I have a feeling it's coming.
Yeah, my 2 cents is I feel like there's a lot of percolation, people are thinking about, but in very sort of broad strokes, they're thinking about, okay, is this, the pandemic, this pause as an opportunity for us to reinvigorate our efforts to transform, to make our own practices and then more broadly influence the industry to be a positive force in responding to the climate crisis. Mm-hmm. I sort of agree with you. I haven't seen sort of people putting out sort of concrete steps that they're taking yet, but it feels like there's a lot of thought. People are starting to think about this. And it sort of brings me back to where I started with my question before people started posting their questions, or just it feels like there's this community of people who are all really motivated and inspired to be a positive force for good, and so one of the things that's been so wonderful and supportive about Bottom Lines is all of these communities, all these companies that are coming together and thinking about, okay, how can we build better? How can we draw down carbon? What do we need to do? And so I feel like that, as things start to change and people start to get back to work, it feels like there's really fertile ground there for a lot of good work to accelerate on those fronts. Mm-hmm. Another more sort of nitty gritty question is about, folks who are still working in the field, and sort of what obstacles people are running into in terms of permitting and inspections. I guess I can speak to that a little bit about just where, a lot of places say that they're open, but then they don't, you can't get in touch with an inspector, right? So technically they're open and supposedly doing inspections, but it's hard to kind of logistically make that happen. What have you heard about that, Kate?
I've definitely heard examples of places where the inspectors have been more lenient about folks like, emailing in photos, examples of the whatever that they're supposed to be inspecting, and doing it without a site visit. I've heard of people doing FaceTime site visits with inspectors. But I'm guessing it varies a lot from town to town.
Yeah, that's what I've seen as well. I'm going to throw out another question of my own as I wait for additional questions to come in here. So you started the the presentation, the webinar, talking about what companies are doing. You highlighted particularly to co-ops, I think South Mountain and New Frameworks, to continue to pay employees for a certain length of time. Do you have any sense of, that was what, 5-6 weeks ago, sort of where companies are now and what they're thinking about as sort of they go into the next stages of this?
Yeah, it's definitely changed over the last 6 weeks, right? Because there was kind of this initial push of like, okay, well, we can at least, we're gonna send everyone home, but we can at least pay them for the next 2 weeks. And sometimes that was just out of kind of the savings of the company, basically, that we can handle that, or that will advance sick pay, things like that, out before any of these federal programs were coming online. So I feel like, that was kind of the first phase was, okay, we're just going to be generous in a lot of cases, try and hold out, not have to actually furlough or lay people off right away. Then as folks started to make those cash flow forecasts and like really kind of get the extent of what this could look like, I think then there was definitely a phase of, okay, well, let's just get people enrolled in unemployment. Like that's what needs to happen. We can't keep bleeding money. This is what the system is for, and this is what we've been paying into. And especially once the CARES Act was passed and there was going to be this additional $600 a week of unemployment insurance, then all of a sudden it was like, okay, I feel better, I feel more okay about putting my employees on unemployment because I know they're going to get that little bit of extra. And then like the third wave has been these PPP loans are starting to come in. Some folks are seeing those in their bank account. Some folks did not get through the first round of PPP. So they're seeing the money come in, and as soon as the money hits their bank account, the clock starts ticking for them to, have this 8 weeks of payroll. So now I'm seeing people hiring people who had laid off staff. They're bringing them back on because they think that it's going to get covered by the PPP. And there's a lot of hesitation about that in some cases. There are a number of issues that come with that idea of rehire. One is, how much do we trust the federal government that they say that this is going to be forgiven, but you're taking a risk. You're not spending this money, and what if at the end of that 8 weeks, they change the details, because the details have not been written yet or not been publicized. I think they are still writing them. So there's that question about, do I trust the government and just go for it and take it on its word that this is really going to happen? Then there's like this other related issue that a lot of companies are dealing with, where they say, okay, yep, we got the PPP, we're going to put people back on payroll, but I've got one person who can't work because they have to be home with their 4 kids. And I've got another person, their job is shut down because the family is in the house, and the clients are not comfortable with them working in the house right now, which is totally legit. But then I've got another job that's like, it only needs 2 people, and they're framing out in the middle of the woods somewhere, and those employees are working 40 hours a week. Everyone's getting paid, only some of the team is working. How does that feel, kind of just from like a equity perspective within the team? And so I think, so that seems like this week's issue that a lot of folks are dealing with as they're bringing people back onto payroll, but not necessarily having them have work to do for a variety of reasons.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that's become clearer and clearer the longer this goes on is that there's no quick return to the way things were. And there's going to have to be this ongoing adjustment and recalibration, and to hear what other companies are doing and how they're navigating that has been very useful. You spoke a little bit about the impact on architecture firms, and that I think what you said is that two things. One, you've seen a bigger business impact in firms that specialize in residential in terms of their pipeline, or but less so in multifamily and commercial and institutional. I'm wondering what either design build or remodeling firms are seeing in terms of their pipelines, staying strong, dropping off, where's that happening for bottom lines companies, or not happening?
Yeah. I mean, interestingly, most people that I've talked to have not seen a huge drop off in either the projects that were in their pipeline or leads. I mean, and there are even some locations that, whether it's Vermont or it's the coast of Maine, where I think they might even be seeing like a bump because folks are fleeing the city and thinking, well, maybe I was going to build a ski house in Vermont, but maybe I'm going to build I'm going to move to Vermont, and I'm going to make a shift full time. So there's some talk about that, actually benefiting construction and, designing and construction in some locations.
Which also presents a sort of conundrum, right? Anyway,
yeah.
that's a bigger issue.
Yeah, not all the ski towns in Vermont are really excited about that. Or all the condos are full of people from Connecticut. But so I think it is variable, and there are some people who are just like, yeah, no, everything is totally shut down and there's nothing for us to work on. But a lot of folks are saying, yeah, our clients, they're just chomping at the bit for us to get back, and like, when can we start? So I don't know that there's one answer to that question.
I think one of the things that's really struck me is how variable things are by your specific location, and how it almost feels, you could go 50 miles and it feels like a totally different world. We at Big Meister, we've been shut down for 6 weeks now, and it's hard to imagine working, but it's hard to imagine doing remodeling work, but it's such a different, you go to the coast of Maine, and it's a totally different world. So we're getting close to 3:45. If there are any final questions, I think I've gotten through the ones that have already come in, but I just wanted to take a moment to invite if there's any last questions people wanted to get in. Well, thank you, Kate. I don't know if Flo has any final words.
I actually think that there was an answer to your call, which is looks like Jennifer Martin is asking for a ray of hope. So if either of you have any sage last words you want to share, I think that actually might be a lovely way to end.
A ray of hope. I think I have been really inspired to see, when you think about the triple bottom line, I think there's like always this conversation around like how important the people are in our companies and the people that we work with every day. But one of the nuggets that I've drawn from this is how important that is for each of these companies. And it's really like come to the forefront because we're like worried about all of our colleagues and their own health, and we're thinking about their families and how can they support their families, and we're thinking about our clients and how will our actions affect our clients, and just like the level of care that I see from all of these businesses is really inspiring, like, I don't know, that's the ray of hope. I'm not I'm not seeing people just be like, oh yeah, lay them off. You know, like these are really hard decisions that are taken with a lot of care. So.
And what about you, Rachel? Do you have a hope to share as well?
So I'll speak along those same lines. I feel like the bottom line, NESEA in general and the bottom lines community in particular is an antidote to it participating in bottom lines and NESEA, and now like my board member hats coming on. I just am so thankful for this community because at a time when it feels like there's, you know, incredible division, you know, across our society, and where it's hard to imagine when and how we begin to return to some semblance of normality. The NESEA community and bottom lines, there's just this incredible sense of solidarity and community and of pulling together to do right by each other and do right by the world. And I think, you know, that's, you know, it's the power of individual companies and small organizations banding together can really make a difference. So maybe that's more grandiose than what you were hoping for, but that.
That's go big.
Okay. So.
Thank you both. My ray of hope, I will share one as well, that part of NESEA's mission statement we talk about a lot, but part of our vision statement is that we imagine a Northeast that is a list of inspiring criteria, but part of that is adaptive and resilient. And I'm really impressed to see the way our community has been being adaptive and resilient in lots of ways, even from everyone's willingness to get together in venues like this, to supporting each other through the bottom lines community and reaching out. And I think that, you know, people keep saying that this now might be a model for things to come, and we're learning a lot and we're learning together, and it does feel resilient and it does feel hopeful. So thank you both again so much, Kate and Rachel, for making this possible. Thank you to our viewing audience at home, most likely, that tuned in today, and hope to hear from you all soon. Thanks, bye.
Bye-bye.